Okay, so we are going to get started. Hello, everyone. I'm Julie Zuckerman, the author of the Book of Jeremiah, and welcome to the April Literary Modiin author event. Before we get started, I'll give my little spiel of introduction. Some of you have heard this before, many times before, and some of you are new. So for those who aren't familiar, Modiin is a planned city in Israel, about halfway between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And we're right near the airport, which is open and very busy. So come visit. And Literary Modiin started a few years ago in June 2019 as a way to bring local Israel-based authors to the large community of English readers we have here. But then with the pandemic, we switched to the virtual events, and we're not going back because we have now people from all over the world who join us and authors from all over the world. So I think today is our 22nd event, and I'm very excited to be here. So the format of the event today is that each author will be speaking for about 15 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions. And we have a large attendance, so everyone's on mute, but you can put your questions in the chat box during, as the authors are speaking or at the end. And if you have any technical difficulties, just send a private note to me in the chat. So we're broadcasting this live on Facebook in Literary Modiin, as I said, so feel free to start a watch party. Before I introduce our first author, I'm just going to quickly share my screen so you can see all of the books of authors we've hosted. So you see our three authors from tonight are right up the top. And I'm going to send out a link to this tomorrow so you can check out all of the books from the authors who have been at Literary Modiin, and I hope you'll check out all of their books. Oh, there's more. Look at, there's so many now. Anyway, I'm not going to keep going with this, but okay, let me introduce our first author. Omer Friedlander was born in Jerusalem in 1994 and grew up in Tel Aviv. He earned a BA in English Literature from the University of Cambridge in England and an MFA from Boston University, where he was supported by the Saul Bellow Fellowship. His short stories have won numerous awards and have been published in the United States, Canada, France, and Israel. A Starworks Fellow in Fiction at New York University, he has earned a Breadloaf Work Study Scholarship as well as fellowship from the Vermont Studio Center. He currently lives in New York City, and The Man Who Sold Air in the Holy Land is his debut collection, and it just came out a few weeks ago. So let me spotlight you now, Omer, and then you can take it away. And
hi, can you hear me? Great. Nice to meet everyone. So yeah, I think Julie mentioned that some of the highlight of these readings is actually to talk about the behind the scenes of the book more than actually, just reading. So I'll try and talk about that, and hopefully, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. So I'll talk a little bit. First, I wanted to start by talking about why I wrote the book in English rather than Hebrew, which is my mother tongue. I grew up in Tel Aviv. So maybe it's a kind of a strange choice. But the way I see it, I wrote it in English because it gives me sort of a bit of distance about the things that I write about. And I think I sort of feel a little bit like a mix of an insider and an outsider in Israel. So, I mean, I grew up there, and it's familiar to me, the way people interact and the way they're friends and the way they argue, which they do a lot. But also, I think I needed a bit more distance, and English gives me that, to be a bit more sort of probing about the place and its contradictions and complexities. So that's the first thing I wanted to talk about. And I'll tell you a little bit about the book. So it's a collection of short stories, 11 stories. It's all set in Israel. And it's filled with sort of characters that are outcasts. So there's junk collectors like Altizachen. There's con artists who sell bottles of air to tourists There's smugglers and sort of people that haunt the world rather than fully live in it. Um, and I think the characters are all looking for some kind of human contact, or intimacy. And the stories explore the sort of possibility and maybe difficulty of relationships across these divides and boundaries. So whether they're political or physical borders. Um, and in the acknowledgement section of my book, at the end, I quote David Grossman, and in um, one of his talks, he says, and now I'm quoting: "Every one of us has a kind of official story that that we present to others, to strangers we meet, or even to people we know. But if we're lucky enough to find a good listener, a sympathetic witness, then they will make us tell not only our official story, but the story underneath it. The power of a good story is that it does not protect us, but instead exposes us and brings us into closer contact with our own life." So that's the end of the quote. So I think that's what I wanted to do, or I hope to do with the stories, is to unearth these more intimate stories of the individuals and to be, a sympathetic listener to the characters. And I think the politics and everything that you usually hear about Israel is in the background and it's unavoidable, but the focus is on the more intimate stories of these characters. Um, okay, so I thought I would talk a little bit about, since it's my first book, um, and maybe some of you also write, and maybe you write in English or Hebrew, I don't know, but and maybe you write short stories and you want to get a collection out, I don't know. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the publishing process, or at least the way it was for me. Maybe it'll be interesting for you to hear. So the first is just a funny story, about the book deal. When my agent sent out the manuscript to editors, we had, a few editors that were interested, and the way it works, they set up phone calls. So this was around my birthday, my 26th birthday, and we took a trip with my family, with my parents, to the Galil, and I said, okay, I'll do the phone calls from there. So we went there. We went to a small village, I think to Klil, and it's, I don't know if you've ever been there, but there's not a lot of phone signal around, which I didn't really know. So it was I was getting nervous. I needed to talk to all these editors, but there was my phone wasn't working. So I told my dad, okay, maybe we'll go somewhere, and so we drove around. We looking for phone signal, and we ended up sort of going to like a nargila bar, and that's where I talked to all the editors, and there were teenagers with motorcycles, going around the thing, and I don't know, it was really surreal, but it worked out. Um, so that was my book deal experience, and yeah, it was published by Random House, and my editor was Robin Desser, who was really brilliant, and so it's a short story collection, which I think is pretty different to a novel, which is something I'm working on now. But with stories, you have to think of how they work together, and also the order that they're in is also pretty important. So it's almost you know like a music album. It depends, what song you begin with and what song you end with, and you're creating a kind of journey, for the listener. So it's similar with a short story collection. You have to decide, which stories go in and which you leave out, and how they might be linked in a way or have some kind of connection. So I think my stories, they're not linked by character, it's different characters, but I think they are linked by place. So they all happen in different parts of Israel, and they're preoccupied with the history and politics of that place. And I think a strong sense of place can really guide a story. So any kind of story that you write is pretty fragile, I think, especially in the beginning, in the early stages of drafting. But when you find the right detail, the invented world becomes more substantial and real, I think, to you and to the reader in their mind. So I think what I like reading the most and writing the most has a kind of vividness or specificity of place. Um, and I like Truman Capote has a quote about a good short story. He says, "It's like an orange. It feels so natural and a part of nature that you can't imagine it any differently." Um, so um, maybe I'll end with a little bit about the writing process itself. So I don't plan my stories in advance. I sort of discover them as I go. And there's this brilliant essay by Zadie Smith, who teaches at NYU. She's one of my teachers. The essay is called That Crafty Feeling. And she talks about feeling like a fraud whenever she talks about the craft of writing, big advice about writing. She says craft isn't abstract, and each individual novel is its own rule book, training ground, factory, and independent republic. So I think what she means is, there's no uh, one way to do things, and every story has to be discovered in its own way and to teach you to write it on its own terms. So that's kind of how I approach it as well. Um, and yeah, I think I think I'll sort of stop there. And if you have any sort of questions later about the process of writing or about the book itself, then I'd be happy to answer. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Omer. Thank you. Okay. I'm going to introduce our next author. One second. Let me go back and no, you can see me as I'm talking. Okay. So we're going to move to Rutu Modan, who is an illustrator, comics artist, and professor at the Bezalel Academy of Art and Design in Jerusalem. She co-founded the Israeli comics collective Actus, which won worldwide recognition and was crowned by ID Magazine as one of the most influential design groups of 2007. She has received several times the Israel Museum Ben Yitzchak Award for children's book illustrations. In 2008, her book Exit Wound won the Eisner Award for the best comics book. Her graphic novel, The Property, was published in 2013. The book also won the Eisner Award for the best graphic novel of 2014, and the special jury prize in the International Comics Festival in, and I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but somewhere in France, and Angoulême, France. And the first prize for the best book of the year in Lucca Comics and Games Festival, Italy. In 2013, she established with Yermi Pincus Noah Library, an independent publishing house specializing in comics for young children. Her comic and children's books were translated into 15 languages, and her last novel, graphic novel, Tunnels, which I have here, was published in the US in November, and she lives in Tel Aviv with her family. So now I'm going to spotlight Rutu and mute myself. Take it away.
Mute myself. Okay. Hi, I will share my screen. Okay, because I want to show you. Because I'm okay. You see it?
All good.
Okay. So since I'm a comics artist, and in comics, of course, image is important as much as the text. That I'm going to show images. And I'll talk a bit. I'll talk also about the process of making tunnels or making comics book the way I do comics in general. So just very briefly about the story. The story is about Nili, Her father was a genius archaeologist. Now he's retired. He has dementia. And when she was around 10, 12, her father thought that he knew, he found the place of the hidden Ark of Covenant. And together they went to look for the covenant in an illegal digging. And now, like about 30 years later, she decided to, and they didn't find it, and the father broke up, and they had to stop. And now, 30 years afterwards, she's going back to the old digging to look for the ark, which she's sure that she's going to find in a very short time. And she collected this group of people to help her, this very rich collector, who has stone. I mean, I forgot the word, but you know, where the ark is hidden. But then she finds out that the old digging is behind the wall. Since she left, she and her father left the old digging, the wall was built, and so now the ark is behind the wall in the C area, in the A area, was a Palestinian area. So in order, because she doesn't, Lily is the kind of person who, when she decides something, she's doing it anyway. She's collaborating with this settler who is expert in digging. He's working in Ir David, and a bunch of hilltop youth. How do you call them in English? Religious.
Hilltop youth, that's what we call it.
To help them with the digging. She's tried to persuade her brother to join. And there's, of course, the enemies. They must have in every book you have to have an antagonist. So this is the enemy, Professor Motke Sarid, who's the head of the archaeological department in the Jerusalem University, in the University Ivrit. So her idea is to dig a tunnel under the wall until she's to the Palestinian area, and to connect to the old digging, and then follow the same track that her father was planning to follow until they find the ark. However, there's on the way there's another digging in the same time. Two Palestinian brothers who dig a tunnel from the opposite direction. They dig a tunnel from the Palestinian area into the Israeli into Israel, because they want to smuggle vegetables. And they join the digging too. You know, this is in this frame, you see that I tried to imitate the famous photo of Clinton, in the Oslo Agreement, of Clinton in the middle and Rabin and Arafat shaking hands. But you see that she's almost making them shake hands. This is what I can, they're forcing them to shake hands and to collaborate in the digging. So this is a story. And what Omer said about the place, something that I think it's very strong in my work too, that my stories are always about connected to a place and time, or people who are stuck in a certain place and time. And so for me, it's a place of going to see where, during the research, going to the place where the story is taking, what is going on, is very important, because going to the place and seeing it, observing it, is something, like Omer said also, like you see the little details, things that you don't think, maybe you wouldn't think of. For example, my first visit was to the archaeology department in the University Ivrit, and I was amazed, amazed by the mess there, because archaeologists are a combination of scientists and I don't know, Indiana Jones, explorer. So it was amazing for me to see how this, things, all these artifacts that we used to see, and we used to see it in museums, behind glasses, like very precious artifacts. But in the department, that actually, this is true. There's too many things, too many vases, too many bones, too many. So it's just the piles of antiques, and also, just it's amazing place where you open a cupboard, and you find that this is one of the cupboards that I found accidentally, and this is what I saw. Or this is a place where you can find the head of a mammoth in just as a ornament in an office. And I tried afterwards. I tried to, when I draw it, I don't have to say it. I just show it. And this is one of the things. One of the themes is how we make these vases. Why are they important? Are they garbage or are they treasures? It depends on the stories that we tell ourselves. For example, I found this also in the archaeology department, and on one of the shelves, and I wasn't sure. I really couldn't decide if it's antiques, like these animals, or if it's something that as that a child, a son of one of the colleges came in his summer vacation and did this ceramic, I don't know, cat. So I put it into the story. There's something I maybe I wouldn't think of if I didn't see it. And this is where Nili, she's trying to take this animal, and she tells the head of the department it's something that she did in the second year in elementary school. This reflects something that a very important collector that I was interviewing during the research told me. He has an amazing collection of artifacts from the biblical times, and really his house is dedicated to it, and it's more than the archaeology department in Israeli Museum, more rich. And his life is now dedicated to this collection, but still, when I was talking to him, suddenly he said, "Look at it! Look at all of this." He told me, "It's like it's garbage. It's like something kids did in school." This is how I got the idea, actually, and because this is Israeli archaeology. There's a lot of many stories, but really not a lot to show. If you compare it to Egypt or to Babylon, what they have, what the amazing thing that they have there. And here, this is a wall. This is near Hebron. I was there. It's an archaeological digging, and I was told this was a wall from the time of Abraham. And for an Israeli, when you say this is a wall from the time of Abraham, it's amazing. It immediately means Abraham was there, or maybe it was the house of Abraham, because we have all these stories inside us, and these stories are so important to us. We want to, and we were disconnected from this place for so many years. So we are, searching for connections through these meaningless stones, actually. So all these things that I saw during the research are coming into later. I put them into the book, and this is actually what gives me the ideas for the plot. This is again Hebron, the Shuhada Street. If you know the sad story, there was this massacre in the mosque by a settler. And then this was the main street. The market was closed since then. This is again Hebron, and here, for example, this is what I'm going to the places that I'm looking. I don't know exactly what I'm searching for, but I'm looking for things that will stimulate me or give me ideas. And for example, here, Hebron is a very beautiful city, and then the combination of and then this is. army base in the middle of the town, and army objects are always ugly because they don't supposed to be beautiful. Nobody tries to make them beautiful. They have to be efficient and they have to be strong. So, and this is like, so, just the fact, seeing it, this ugly, I don't know how to call it, in the middle of stuck in the middle of the street. I don't have, I don't need to explain it. I think you can think for yourself what ideas it can give me. Or for example, this amazing, this is the Palestinian side, and this drawing on the wall, and it's not just the drawing on the wall. It's also the fact that somebody tried to burn it, and you see it, and also that it's in the middle of the junkyard. Again, no, it's like a poem, it's like a poem by itself. This is how I drew it in my story, the book. But looking around, there were also things that I really didn't like to see, that just, for example, where I didn't find a place to put it in the book, but there was near the wall, this Palestinian village, and the huge key that represent the keys to the houses that the Palestinians were evicted from in 48 or in 67, and this large key in just this, it's like a sign that we are not going to forget. We are not going to give it up, never. This is something that for Israeli eyes not so pleasant to see, but maybe it's good that we know that it exists. Or for example, this walls, this time it was the Israeli side. It's Israeli drawing, religious drawing as a temple, and the wish for the temple to be built soon. Again, the combination of politics, religion, all myth is quite, and also the grass. Somebody is trying to, also the fact that somebody was trying to have grass in a place was never in history there was grass. There's grass not supposed to be there, but we force the grass on this state, on this place. It was, I'm even looking, when I'm going there, I was looking for the place where the digging is going to take, where the digging is going to be in the book. So I was traveling around the area, and everything is material. For example, the colors. The colors were, for me, it was the best time of the year. It was around February, March, like around this time. So everything was green, but the green was so, striking. And later, so the combination of many greens and grays of the stones. And this is, again, when I come to the part when I color the book, this is, again, things that I can use for this place. You see this, exactly what I needed. I was looking for a hole in the mountain with a tunnel inside. So after I'm not going to talk a lot about writing the story, although this is the most complicated phase in all the process, but there's not a lot to say about it or to show about it, because it's just, me lying on the sofa, crying that I don't have ideas, and that it's going to be a very boring story and nobody's going to like it, and then writing few sentences and then going back to the sofa and falling asleep. But in the end, there is a script. a kind of a script. So I write it more or less like a movie script, is because it's dialogues and then descriptions of what I'm going to show. And afterwards, I'm usually start with looking for the characters, and I'm doing all kind of doodles. And when something is, until something, okay, this is more or less the character that I'm going to draw. And then again, the colors, it's like a color, it's like a code. It's very important because in comics, you have so much information thrown on you, the text and the images, and many things happen, and the bubbles. And so when I have a color code for each, it's like a color code for each of the characters. For example, Modi, the Palestinian brother who's with his red coat, or Neely with a blue and yellow outfit. And then the reader, it makes even if there are many characters, many frames, it's very easy to follow the characters because of the colors. So I'll show this. After I write the story, I do a sketch for the whole book. It's not a beautiful sketch. It's like it's a storyboard, but it's very important part because then I plan the sizes of the frames and the combination of the frames. And this is like the rhythm of the book, because it's more like because there is a different way we look at a big frame or a sequence of smaller frames. It's like, so this is how I built the rhythm of the book. And so I'm showing it to you, but actually it's a sketch only for me. And I have a storyboard, the whole book. And okay, this is in Hebrew because I do the sketch, I write in Hebrew and I draw the storyboard in Hebrew, but I draw in English because this is okay, maybe mostly because of the text, because I have to flip the book, and English takes a lot more, no more space than Hebrew, because we don't have vowels in Hebrew. We don't use vowels, almost don't use vowels. So it's very important to me to calculate the space that I have for the bubbles. So you see that also it's much more elaborated and many details and drawn more beautifully. It's more or less the same. The storytelling is more or less the same. Sometimes things are changing through the process, but this is the structure that I'm working with. I have more time. How much time?
No, we're kind of out of time. You want to wrap? Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just show this. This is very short, very satisfying. Just how the storyboard is made.
Love it.
Okay, that's all.
That is great. That's so fascinating. And I was writing questions to ask, but you answered them. So great. Let me introduce our next author. Patrick Hicks is the author of The Commandant of Lubzeg, In the Shadow of Dora, which I have here. Adoptable and The Collector of Names, which I think I have that on Kindle, so I can't pull it up, among others. His work has appeared on NPR, the PBS NewsHour, American Life and Poetry, and his first novel was selected for National Reading Group Month. He is the writer in residence at Augustana University, as well as a faculty member in the MFA program at Sierra Nevada University. He was recently a finalist for an Emmy and hosts the popular radio show Poetry from Studio 47. So I'm going to spotlight you now, Patrick.
Wonderful.
Take it away.
Great, and thank you for having me on, Julie. And I really enjoy listening to Omer and Rutu talk about trying to find their way into their books, and that I can certainly relate to that. It's sometimes torturous and sometimes fun. The initial spark for this particular novel came to me pretty quickly, and I kind of thought, if I don't mess it up, maybe I've got a good narrative here. But it's called In the Shadow of Dora, but the subtitle is, it's a novel about the Holocaust and the Apollo program, because there is a direct link between those two things. You know, we think of the space age beginning in Russia or America, but it really began in a secret underground Nazi concentration camp in the center of Germany. And what happened there and what was built there, of course, changed the course of the 20th century, and it's still with us today. So although we tend not to think about it, it's true that the Nazis were the first to put something into space. It was called the V2. It was a devastating weapon. The V stood for vengeance, the vengeance weapon, and it was essentially the world's first functional rocket. The Nazis tested it by firing it straight up, just out of curiosity to see how high it would go. And it passed something called the Kármán line, which is 60 miles above us. And that's still the sort of barrier for space. And it soared well beyond that to about 102 miles straight up. So work for the V2, it began in a place called Peenemünde, which is on the northern coast of Germany, and they'd fire the V2 into the Baltic Sea to test it and to see how well it could be controlled. And obviously they wanted to fire it into the sea because they often had a tendency of exploding. And the V2's production started off fairly slowly, but as the Allies found out about this base in Peenemünde, the US and British bombers flew into Peenemünde and bombed it without mercy on August 26, 1943, and totally destroyed the facility. So the Nazis wanted to continue to build the V2 rocket, so they decided to move it underground into what essentially was a secret underground concentration camp called Dora Mittelbau. And work began on that in mid-1943. And some 20,000 souls would die at Dora Mittelbau. Roughly 1 in 3 people that went into Dora Mittelbau didn't exit. They didn't live. They didn't survive. It was a place of overwhelming brutality. It had no gas chamber, but really it hardly needed one because the prisoners were worked to death. The unofficial motto of the camp was Vernichtung durch Arbeit, which means death through work. And it was these slaves that built the V2. And I'm struck by the fact that this place of ferocious cruelty was also the point of highest of high technology. Very clearly, the Allies and the Soviets and the United States wanted this technology at the end of the war. But I think it's fair to say that few people have heard of Dora Mittelbau. It's not in sort of the common lexicon. And there are a couple of reasons for this. One, it started off as a secret camp built inside a mountain because what was being built in there had to remain a secret, and the Nazis didn't want the Allies to find out about it. But even if they did, it was in the middle of a mountain. There's no amount of ordnance that could ever have reached Dora Mittelbau to destroy it. So while the V2s were being built, it was a secret camp. And then once it was liberated by the American army in April of 1945, of course, the United States stripped out all of that technology and filled up rail cars full of warheads and servo motors, and it got sent to New Mexico to be studied and tested and made better. So the United States had a vested interest to keep it secret. Where Dora Mittelbau was located in Germany, it was a part of what would become East Germany. So once the United States left Dora Mittelbau, of course, it was taken over by the Soviet Union, and then the Iron Curtain comes down, and then again we have this inability to do research or really know much about Dora Mittelbau. So for all of these reasons, it's a camp that hasn't sort of registered in the popular imagination. But of course, the other reason is what was found there, all of these Nazi scientists were brought to the United States, men like Werner von Braun, Arthur Rudolph, Kurt Diebus, Walter Dornberger, and they were brought to the United States, and they were not charged with crimes against humanity, which they absolutely should have been. And America made a Faustian bargain. America essentially said, you build us the greatest rockets the world has ever seen, and you can live in freedom and peace in the United States. And that is precisely what they did. They built rockets that got us to the moon. The Saturn V rocket is the most powerful rocket ever to be built. I take that back. There's the one rocket NASA's building right now, which will probably be more powerful. But we never would have gotten to the moon without that Saturn V. And that Saturn V was built by Wernher von Braun and a variety of the other Nazi scientists that were directly in charge of Dora Mittelbau. So in my book, The Shadow of Dora, it takes place in two parts. Part one takes place in the tunnels. And I was thinking of the tunnels while Rutu was talking about her book of tunnels. Takes place in the tunnels. My main character, Eli Hessel, is a prisoner that's forced to build these rockets. He survives, and that's not a spoiler alert because it's written on the back of the book here. He survives and he immigrates to the United States, gets his PhD in astrophysics at Columbia, and because of his rarefied knowledge, he's hired by NASA. And part two takes place at the Kennedy Space Center 48 hours before the launch of Apollo 11. And my main character, Eli, is in charge of, he's one of the developers of the F1 engines. There were 5 of those at the base of the Saturn V rocket. And the men who are his bosses at the Kennedy Space Center were his tormentors at Dora Mittelbau. So I talk about the narrative arc, but also the arc of history with the rocket itself. So that's the crux of what my book is about. And I'd love to sort of, take any questions you might have. What I thought I would do is read 2 pages so you can get sort of a sense of the writing style, and maybe give you a little bit more information on the V2 itself. So this is from a chapter called The Vengeance Weapon, and I'll just read 2 pages, so maybe 3 minutes. The world's first long-range rocket weighed almost 28,000 pounds, and it was so technologically advanced that Nazi Germany became the first country to put an object made by human hands into space. The Kármán line marks the boundary between our world and the starry black that lies beyond. Thus, at least according to this measure, space begins 100 kilometers above sea level, which is roughly 62 miles straight up. During one particular test in the summer of 1944, launching from an island on the Baltic coast called Greifswalder Oya, the V2 soared past the Kármán line by almost 50 miles. The Nazis, however, weren't interested in setting altitude records. They only cared about height, so that the V2 could arc over the top of a deadly parabola and then scream its way back down toward Earth, where it would punch holes into cities hundreds of miles away. The V2 was never designed to stay up in the heavens. It was designed to fall. The rocket was essentially an enormous projectile that didn't require a cannon. A button was pushed, fuel ignited in blinding fury, and off it went into the clouds. Although Eli, he's my main character, although Eli had no way of knowing it at the time, he and the other prisoners at Dora Mittelbau were building the world's first ballistic missile. He later came to understand its terrible destructive power, and that the V stood for Vergeltungswaffe, vengeance weapon. For its victims, it blew open the door to the next world. The V2 was the brainchild of a young man named Wernher von Braun. Quick with a smile, he made parties sparkle with laughter and was known as something of a ladies' man. Though only in his 20s, von Braun knew how to organize, how to charm, and most importantly, how to turn blueprints into realities. He was the center of gravity for the V2 program at Peenemünde. All major decisions orbited around him, and he made sure his rockets hit their intended targets. Von Braun joined the Nazi Party in 1937, and 3 years later, Heinrich Himmler personally invited him to join the SS. Although von Braun accepted this commission, he would spend the rest of his life bending attention away from the fact that he was involved with the same organization that ran Dachau, Treblinka, and Auschwitz. At first, Hitler was totally unimpressed with the V2. He saw it as simply a massive artillery shell with an extremely long range. But as Germany began to lose the war, he slowly warmed to the idea. He wanted to punish the Allies by turning their pretty little cities into smoldering wastelands. On a July evening in 1943, von Braun dimmed the lights in an underground bunker and showed the Führer a silent movie of a V2 taking off. As the color film splashed life against a concrete reinforced wall, Hitler sat slumped in a wooden chair, a black cape draped over his shoulders. He watched a rocket shoot into the sky on a mute flame, then it arced away at 3 times the speed of sound. Hitler beamed and jumped to his feet. He wanted to know what the annihilating effect of the warhead might be and apologized that he hadn't believed in the project sooner. Clapping his hands together, he made the young SS officer a professor on the spot. It was a rare honor. Within days, an order was given for thousands of V2s to be built. The goal was to launch them like locusts towards New York and Washington, D.C. In time, maybe they could even hit Chicago. After the war, when fame tapped von Braun on the shoulder and he became the smiling face of America's fledgling space program, he downplayed his involvement with Dora Mittelbau and tried to keep it in the shadows. Whenever he was forced to talk about it, he made it clear that he never visited the actual concentration camp. He said that he only saw the tunnels. While this may have been true, there was little difference between the two places. Brutality and wickedness happened in both. And so if von Braun did have any private reservations about the massive number of deaths that occurred inside the mountain where his rockets were being built, he kept such thoughts to himself. He turned instead to blueprints. He focused on gyroscopes, propellant, and lift. The idea for moving the rocket assembly underground happened shortly after waves of American and British bombers pulverized the existing plant at Peenemünde. Rather than rebuild a factory that could be hit again, the Nazis decided that everything should be hidden beneath a mountain. And so it was that they created a secret underground concentration camp. They marched skeletal prisoners into an old gypsum mine and ordered them to plug dynamite into rock. They ordered them to dig. And I think I'll sort of stop there because I want to leave plenty of time for any questions that you might have for the three of us.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm gonna re-spotlight everybody, but while I'm doing that, there was a question. One of the questions was for you, which is how did you get interested in this topic?
Oh, yeah. I've always been fascinated by space. I was born in 1970, right at the height of the Apollo program. I have no memory of it because Apollo 17 happened and finished when I was 2 years old, but my father just was fascinated by Apollo. So I grew up with, understanding it from that perspective. And after I wrote my first novel, The Commandant of Lubezek, which is about the Holocaust, I thought, all right, I got to focus on some light here and move out of the darkness. So I wanted to write about the Apollo program, but as I started to think about the novel and the Apollo program, the idea of the V2 came up, and I thought, wow, I've not seen a novel like this before, where there's a direct connection between these two. So that's where the novel idea came from.
Yeah, there's another question about that from Fran, who is the granddaughter of one of the victims of the last V2 attack on London, which killed 132 people. And is that the one that hit the Woolworths? Because I just read another book about that called Light Perpetual. But she's asking if you relate to the effects of the V2 program in London in the book.
Just in passing, because the novel is told through the eyes of my main character, who's Jewish, and he wouldn't have had anything to do with that. But my wife is British, and my wife's grandmother, God bless her, I had discussions with her, and she said, the V1, the V1 and the V2, they were just terrifying because they were going faster than the speed of sound. So there was no point. There were no air sirens or anything like that. So I know from my wife's grandmother that it was constant terror. You just never knew when a V2 was going when it was going to be fired and where it would land, because they were indiscriminate.
Okay. So let me go back to a few other questions. There's more questions for you, Patrick, but let's go. There was one for Omer from Judy. The order of stories is important, as you said. Can you talk more about what makes a good order or makes a bad order in a story collection?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there are really any rules. It's I think more of a kind of gut feeling or instinct. I think, yeah, you want to start maybe with one of the strongest stories and end with one of the strongest stories. But yeah, I mean, I think the first story in my book is called Jaffa Oranges, and I think it kind of roots you very firmly in a place and in a time. So maybe that was kind of the reason I chose it to start with.
I'm going to answer that question also, because I have this book called Alone with All That Could Happen by David Joust. I think it was republished with a different name now. And there's an essay in here called Stacking Stones, I think so. Stacking Stones, Building a Unified Short Story Collection. And he goes through about 10 or 12 different ways that you can structure a story collection. And it was very helpful for me when I was working on my collection. Also, I had to figure out the right order. And I went through 6 different possibilities until okay. Patrick, your time is done. That was my timer. Okay. Let me go back and look at some other questions. So yes, in case anyone missed it, Tunnels is published in English. And well, all 3 of the books are published in English. And another question for Patrick, do you have a personal connection to the Holocaust?
Do I?
Yeah.
I don't. You know, and now I've written 2 novels about the Holocaust, and my 3rd one is nearing completion. I'll be sending it off to the publisher, and that too is about the Holocaust. It's an understandable question to get. I mean, I'm an Irish Catholic kid that grew up in a river town in Minnesota. So I don't have a personal connection, but I do remember I was very young when I found out about it, and the injustice of that shocked me at a young age. And I guess that sense of indignation has never really left me. And I'll sort of, I'll also say, I know it sounds mystical and a bit weird, but sometimes I don't think that writers choose stories. I think stories choose writers. And I know this sounds maybe hard to understand if you're not a writer, but I find I'm just compelled to write certain narratives.
Okay, great. Okay, there's a question for you, Omer. Will you write stories that are set in America? And do your stories have a personal connection?
I don't know if I'll write something set in America. I'm working on a novel now, which isn't set in America, but I don't usually like to talk about kind of works in progress. And I think there's something that Amos Oz says about kind of not X-raying the baby to not harm it in the womb. So my book is still kind of in that stage. Yeah, but I mean, I guess kind of like what Patrick is saying, I think it's, yeah, the things that you write about is, you know, maybe things that you're sort of very obsessed with, kind of maybe subconsciously. I think with this collection, I didn't know I was interested in the things that I was interested in. And when I started writing, I sort of discovered, okay, this is actually what the story is, and this is what interests me. So I think, you know, sometimes you don't know in advance.
I have a question for Rutu. You mentioned that you weren't going to talk about the process where you're just like lying on your couch and trying to figure out the story. But how long does that process usually take you, at least to date, with the books you publish?
So now it's not really something that is usual, but it takes what it takes. The writing is a stage that is most mysterious, that I don't know exactly, because I have to invent a story, and I don't know how much it's going to take me. And this time it took me really like 3 years or something. There was a lot of time and stuff, but it can also be 6 months for a previous book, and so it depends. I can say more about the drawing. This drawing is like, you know, it's a craft, but it's something that and maybe because I'm no more fluent in drawing than in writing, you know, it's more natural to me. So the drawing I can, you know, I know that it takes, like a book like Tunnels take me 1.5 years to draw, but I'm drawing many hours a day. It's like sometimes 14, 16 hours a day. I don't know if I cannot write 16 hours a day. You know, my limit is like 3-4 hours, and then it's enough. But drawing is something, you know, it's like in playing an instrument or something. So I can do it forever. I can do it just because I also have other things in life like family and teaching, so I have to stop. But yeah, so it's about like this, about a year and a half of very hard work.
Yeah. Thank you. There's a question for Patrick, but I think I'm going to widen it for everybody about, how much research did you have to do? Rutu, you talked a little bit about the research you did, but like, and I guess my question is, do you do all your research or most of it like ahead of time before you're outlining the story or before you're, or are you doing it, today, like as you're going along? And Omer, also a question for you. Have you done research for your stories? So who wants to go first?
Okay, it also depends on the book, but for this book I did very long research for I think a year of reading, and I read a lot. I took a course on archaeology because I didn't know anything about archaeology, and more than that, I found out that I don't even know the whole history. I know the history I was told in school about, and I'm talking about Israeli or the Jewish history or the Hebrew history, and but I had a lot of holes, in my knowledge. So I learned history. I read about archaeology. I interviewed many people. This was the most fun. I interviewed archaeologists, collectors, even one grave robber that, and also people who are experts in bombing, people who are experts in digging. So it was, and I continue. So I said, and during the research, I started to build the story. Okay, it gave me ideas, so I wrote them, and then when I was really actually writing the story, from time to time I stopped and did some research if something was missing. Research is fun, really.
Yeah, it is.
The
Yeah.
best part.
Love it.
You don't have to do anything. You just have to.
I did it the opposite way. I think I wrote the stories and sort of researched after. I think I have a teacher who says, or he quotes Doktorov, who says, do the least amount of research you can get away with. And I think what he means is, don't write in a way that you don't know what you're writing about, but he means don't let the research totally guide your story. First you want to figure out what the characters are feeling, or what the situation is, and then the research really helps bring things to life. And obviously you don't want to make a stupid mistake, but don't let it totally guide the because you can get kind of swamped. I think when I was doing research, it's fun, like Rutu was saying, and I think you can kind of get sort of swamped in it, and instead of the story. So I guess my way is a little bit doing research throughout and then after.
I start by reading a lot of books. So I read a lot of books about the V2 program, Operation Paperclip, which brought the Nazi scientists to America, a huge book about the history of Dora Mittelbau. And in total, I think I read about 10 books. And then I was very grateful to the granting agencies that I went to Dora Mittelbau twice, and I got into the tunnels of Dora Mittelbau, went to the Kennedy Space Center, because of course I needed to understand that to write part 2 of the novel. I went to the Johnson Space Flight Center and the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, because the Marshall Space Flight Center, that was basically built by Wernher von Braun. It was like the United States said, here's a ton of money, Dr. von Braun, go build the biggest rocket you can. And that is in Huntsville, Alabama today. So then, once I gather information, I write the book, and around, I guess, the 3rd or 4th draft, I'd like to revisit certain places just to make sure I've got the historical aspects correct. And so it takes a long time. Doing research at Dora Mittelbau was emotionally challenging for sure. But when I went to the Kennedy Space Center, I was like a kid in a candy store, because I'm seeing, where Apollo took off and everything.
So there's a follow-up question for you, Patrick, about
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about how you decide to what to fictionalize with your characters, location, and plot versus what you decide not to fictionalize?
Oh, that is a great question. I don't know who asked that, but that's a great
Nina.
question. You know, when it comes to writing about the Holocaust, I have an ironclad rule that I am historically accurate, you know, at that anything that just because I'm writing fiction doesn't mean I can make stuff up. I have very strong feelings about that, but I do have a main character that you know, springs from my imagination. So I decide that, you know, whatever happens to my character must be historically accurate enough that it either did happen to someone else or it could have happened to someone else. And I sort of take it from there. And in The Shadow of Dora, many of the guards that feature at Dora Mittelbau are real guards. You know, so I did a deep dive on who some of the guards were, and I'd never heard of some of these men. They weren't tried for crimes against humanity, and they absolutely should have, but they got away with it. So I made a choice to write about real guards because I wanted people to read this and get to the end of the novel and have that same sense of outrage that I feel that they weren't imprisoned.
Thank you. Okay, there's been a request, Omer, for you to read since you didn't read any stories, or so. Do you have a few minutes of something you can read for us?
Yeah, sure. I can read the opening of the title story, The Man Who Sold Air in the Holy Land. Simcha was the man who sold air from the Holy Land, not to be confused with those unimaginative con artists who sold oil from the oily land or water from the Dead Sea. One summer, he tried his luck selling oil. He picked enough olives from public gardens and private lawns to make a few decanters worth. As for selling water, he filled up carafes from the tap in the kitchen sink and added plenty of salt to make it authentic, as if it were siphoned directly from the Dead Sea. These projects all proved too much work, too risky and too costly. Air was everywhere. He didn't need anybody's permission to bottle it, and most important, it was free. Like the Mediterranean Cabernet Sauvignon of the Judean Valley, Simcha's product came in boutique bottled packaging, designed for the sophisticated customer with a discerning palate. He made little sticker labels for each bottle with his daughter Lali's help. On each label, she drew a bearded old man blowing a gust of wind. Apparently, he was a Greek god of some kind she studied in school, but Simcha thought he looked more like the miser, the owner of the falafel place down the street, who enjoyed quoting biblical verse from Kohelet and sold half a measly pita for a small fortune. Together, Simcha and Lali polished the empty glass bottles with a rag, placed them side by side in the blue trolley, and went out in search of tourists willing to buy air. With his keen eye and sixth sense, a tingling sensation in the presence of the very wealthy, Simcha zeroed in on them from all the way across Dizengoff Street, window shopping. Two middle-aged American tourists, Jewish of course, and proudly patriotic with their I Heart Israel shirts, probably with plans to marry their daughter off to an El Al pilot. He could tell they were rich by the shine of their teeth. The husband's wallet practically bulged out of his back pocket, plump as a peach. The man was flushed, sweat pooled under his arms and made his neck shine. The young wife, petite and dressed impeccably in white linen, was starstruck by a golden necklace in the window, playing with the diamond ring on her finger. Her hair, like the necklace, was golden. Although Simcha knew that her hair was not really spun of solid gold, it did give her a certain advantage. If in dire need, she could cut off her own hair and sell it to the highest bidder. Simcha pulled his trolley along in the tourist direction, empty bottles clanking and clinking as he went, while Lali came over from the other end of the street, wearing her adorable dress, spotted with starfish and sea snails, holding Moshe Dayan, the one-eyed cat, in her arms. Simcha reached the tourists, who were peering at the display in the front store window of Zehava's Jewelry in Judaica, silver goblets and mezuzahs, pearl necklaces, blueberry-sized diamond earrings sitting snugly in a green velvet case. Lali stopped in front of Simcha, admiring the bottles of air arranged in the trolley, while Moshe Dayan, curled up in her arms, groomed his fur, licking his forepaw with his quick, scratchy tongue. Mr. Sir, Lolly said, in the English they had practiced, what do you have there? Oh, this? I'm only selling air. Air? Why would anyone buy air? This isn't just any air. It's very special. I'll tell you a secret. Lolly leaned in and her father whispered gibberish in her ear. The tourists stopped and were staring now, dumbstruck by the interaction. I want 10 of them, Lolly said. 10, you couldn't afford even one, my dear. I can sell my cat, Moshe Dayan. Please. This cat, he only has one eye. How much could he possibly be worth? The tourists looked mortified. The golden-haired wife clicked her tongue in disapproval, as if it were unkind to remind the cat that he only had one eye. Visually challenged feline is the correct term, Simcha imagined her saying, at an annual dinner for the charitable foundation she set up in support of downtrodden and dim-sighted kittens. The rich couple stopped to stare, and now came the final blow. Lali went over to the tourists, the visually challenged feline in her arms, stared at her shoes, and gave her speech. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, she said. I offer you my cat, Moshe Dayan, to purchase. He may only have one eye, but he doesn't break things often. He's named after the famous Israeli war hero who lost his eye in the struggle for our nation's freedom. We can't buy your cat, honey, the American lady said. It wouldn't be right. Lali hid her face in the cat's fur. What's in them anyway? The American man said. Oh, and these, Simcha said. Nothing, only air. Then why does she want them so bad? The husband said. How much are you charging? 50 shekel per bottle for the usual customer. For the girl, I'll give you a very special discount, 50% off. Now only 25 shekel per bottle. The wife looked at her husband, raising one eyebrow like a golden bow. The husband seemed annoyed, drumming his fingers on his thighs. It's nothing, she mouthed. The husband looked at his wife, and Simcha imagined him trying to calculate the cost of refusing to buy the bottles of air. Would they fight for the rest of their vacation? Would she give him the silent treatment and act as if he didn't exist? Would she leave him for a younger Israeli man who ran ultra marathons and worked in tech, without thinking, who bought bottles of air on a whim, just because, without thinking twice, because money meant nothing to him? The husband sighed, nodded warily, accepting his fate with modest bravery. How many bottles would you like, honey? The wife asked. I think I'll stop there.
Love it.
I have a question to Omer.
Go ahead.
Did you invent the air bottles or?
Yeah, I mean, there's a kind of concept of a Luftmensch, who's a kind of, a man who's really impractical, and when he's doing business and he never gets anything right. So I think I sort of took this concept of someone who can't get anything right when he's doing business, and he's always getting these, coming up with schemes to make money really quickly, like selling air to tourists, but then bringing him to Israel, which is, the place where began with sort of this desire to create a new Jewish person, that's different from the diaspora sort of Jew. So I think this clash is what kind of made this story. Maybe.
The reason I'm asking, because many years ago in a tourist shop in Israel, but I think it was really like maybe 25 years ago, there was air for sale. Air from the Holy Land to sell in small tin boxes, like like sardines, like the sardines that you can't open it, just with an can opener.
Oh, amazing.
But
wow.
yeah,
Okay.
so you invented something that somebody, but doesn't it happen many times with writing, that you invent something and then you find out that you invented something that happened already?
Yeah.
That's why it feels authentic. Okay. I had someone ask me a question privately, which is, how do I choose the books for these events? And it's really about books I want to read. It's very, but there is also a small committee that helps me sometimes select the books. So it's books I want to read. And in fact, the way I heard about Patrick's book was because I have a newsletter I put out once a month, and I mentioned that I was working on a story that takes place on the day of the moon landing, and I was asking people for who remember watching the moon landing if they wanted to share any of their memories with me, so I could use it as little details in my story. And Gottlieb told me she just interviewed you, Patrick, for her podcast, and so that's how I heard about your book. And as soon as she told me, I'm like, okay, I got to order that book. So
He asked some wonderful questions.
yeah. So, does anybody have any other questions before we wrap up, or do you all have any questions for each other? Okay. I will say that we already have the May event that is planned for May 22nd, Sunday, May 22nd. I'll be sending it out in the thank you email tomorrow, but scheduled to appear at that event is Ilan Barnahama, who I think is with us tonight, for his novel Escape Route, Rachel Berenbaum for her novel Atomic Anna, and Chaviva Ner David for her memoir Dreaming Against the Current. So I hope you'll all join us in May. And that's it. I want to say thank you to everyone, to Patrick, Rutu, and Omer. It was great to hear you, to listen to you and hear about your processes.
Thank you, Julie.
I always come away from these things feeling very inspired, so I hope our listeners did as well.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank
Yeah.
you very much
Thank
for
you.
all of you.
Bye.
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 Bye.